Yeah.
How much time do we have?
So we have until 7:30.
Okay,
Usually we'll stop with about 10 to 15 minutes left and let the other folks ask questions.
good.
All
Amazing.
right. So we are live. We are on YouTube and we are on Zoom, and we've got some wonderful folks in the Zoom with us. But I'm so happy to be here with my dear friend, Abby. Um, Thank you for taking the time out of your schedule. We've got a lot going on.
It's been quite the day today alone. Everything from, well, a doctor's appointment, which is standard, but then I was at the Hanukkah event with Tish James, with Attorney General, and then spent a good 2 hours in Borough Park. So we got a lot of
Oh,
that was
you're in
an
my
experience.
neighborhood.
Yes, I was close to you. I mean, I just went to get some Hanukkah stuff for a better price that are very importantly, I think for a lot of people that are not made in Israel, but that are made
Sure.
here. So that's a good place. I go every year. But a lot of people, I think more than usual, like stop me to talk and like take selfies and whatever, which has been an interesting experience.
Yeah, and Borough Park in particular.
Yes,
That
I mean, Barbach
is.
has always been a bit like I choose Barbach over Williamsburg because I feel more Barbach is relative is doing a lot of work here, compared to Williamsburg. Barbach is relatively more open, but I think things are changing everywhere. I don't know if
Yeah.
you saw the videos. The mayor-elect Zoran was last night at Boat. So we can. I feel like we're diving into this conversation without
Yeah.
planning, but um, Satmar, which is the Hasidic group that a lot of people know, even though it's not a Hasidic group that I grew up in. But they do every year. They have basically their own holiday ultimately that's called Kuf Aleph Kislev, which just like 4 days before Hanukkah. They do a really big. So that is the day that the first Satmar Rebbe kind of crossed the border into Switzerland during World War II. So, which is actually quite complicated. He was on the train with Kastner, and like the whole, like, some people might know the Kastner trials, that actually was about that train, which had a lot to do with how he got out. We don't have to go into that. But
Not beyond the
they
scope
do,
of this night. Yeah.
there's a lot going on there. There's a lot going on there. There's some claims of hypocrisy, like because that train was actually run by one of the Zionist organizations, and he was telling people not to get, even during the Holocaust, which was a very complicated statement to make, where he was telling people to refuse any help from Zionist organizations, and then he took the help. Whatever. We're not gonna go into that right
No,
now.
no need to relitigate the past.
But
So,
the point is, they do this really big events, the largest events of the year. Both there's like two main Satmar communities, and the run went to both of them, and people were extremely welcoming, and it was really nice, and they were all they all openly and officially welcomed him and talked about him being there and being excited, and everyone clapped. And I know that he had a great time. I have heard directly already. Had a really great time. So yeah, it was an interesting day. It was an interesting 24 hours for me in a lot of different parts of the world, and that in a lot of different parts of my life. And then last night was Brad Lander. I was also Brad Lander, who a lot of us know, who's also a member of JFresh, launched his congressional campaign. So that also happened.
yeah.
I feel like I'm landing from an intense 24 hours, and I'm happy to.
Yeah. A really intense 24 hours in the midst of like an intense year. So, let's let's dial back all the way, right? So you've got to book
Genesis?
out well, your Genesis, yes, the birth of Eve. So you've got a book out about your life becoming Eve, and there's a play now based on the book. And so a lot of people know about you. A lot of people know about your life, but there are still some people who don't.
Okay.
So when you introduce yourself to new communities, what do you want them to first understand about you and your
Hmm.
work, just to kind of contextualize who you are in this moment and all that you do, because you do so much.
Yeah. So I think I have to always start with the Hasidic community, where I was raised, and that is, I used to think that's a bad thing. I've come to realize that I think we each are the sum total of our experiences, and that's That's it is what it is, and that is beautiful. I mean, I think as much as I try to run it when I try to run away from it, so much of who I was who I was not. I would be like, I'm not Hasidic, I'm not Orthodox, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that. And it wasn't very healthy. So I've learned to like embrace a lot of the parts of like, yes, this is where I grew up, so let me share a bit about that. So I grew up in the Hasidic community, so a bit about that for those who might not know nothing about the Hasidic community. Um, so there's two parts to this. There's the Hasidic movement, which is a uh, almost a counter cultural, like almost these like anarchist, spiritually anarchist movement that begins in the middle of the 18th century, founded by a guy who's known as Israel ben Eliezer, known as the Baal Shem Tov, who founded this movement, who was originally taking a lot of Kabbalistic ideas and put them into day-to-day life. So you can think of it a lot as both a version of applied Kabbalah, like beyond the mysticism, but actually demystifying a lot of it. But the more important part of the Hasidic movement was to bring kind of a version of like let's take a few big ideas. So at the time in Eastern Europe, in most communities, you had a very small percentage of the community that were the rabbis and the educators and the let's even call them elite, the elite, both in not necessarily in a financial capacity, but in a spiritual way. And then you had everyone else living in the shtetls who tended in Eastern Europe, who tended to know quite little. And there was this like very clear picture that like, oh, in order to get close to God, you need to study all day and you need to follow a very specific path and you need to follow all those rules. And then this guy who is kind of a hippie, at least like what we would call him today, who has spent decades just roaming around the Carpathian Mountains, for anyone who knows that part of central Ukraine and Romania, and doing all these weird stuff. And he is like, you know what? No, you have there's like those stories where he says that a person who studies all day and then has all the perfect intentions comes into synagogue for evening prayers, and then there's another person who spent the whole day working in with the horses and the buggies in the field and doesn't even understand a word of what he's saying, but that person has to sacrifice more to come into synagogue, and then that person's prayer, who doesn't know what he's saying, could be just as important and often even more spiritually significant. And like a lot of messages like this, kind of like democratizing Judaism and being like everyone has their own path to God and to Judaism, redefining a lot what God is also was a big part of it. And what becomes the beauty of of Hasidic Judaism is that you have the very like deeply in-depth, well-educated, you get those teachings from people going back into deep Kabbalistic, and you have by the second and third generation, you have very well-educated rabbis who are writing books on Jewish law and spirituality. And then all of those people coming with a message, though, even if you know nothing about that and you just do your best and you try your best and you find your own path, you're just as valid and you're just as good as a Jew, even if you think you're a bad Jew. I
Yeah,
think
and
is
it's
a good way
interesting.
of encapsulating that message. But
It's
what
so
happened?
interesting that, I'm
Yeah,
sorry
yeah,
to
go ahead.
interrupt you,
Yeah, no, go
that
ahead.
like quite often, especially because they line up time-wise, the Reform movement and the Hasidic movement are looked at as like polar opposites.
They were
But
not.
they were not. But in that way, in the way that you're describing it, they're actually very, very similar, just coming at it from different parts of the world, really.
Yes. And I think so. So what's so interesting though also is you have the early Hasidic movement is being opposed by it wasn't even called Orthodoxy at the time because the concept of Orthodoxy was basically developed as a response to Reform and to the Enlightenment, but the mainstream and the establishment starts fighting with them really intensely, less so during the Baal Shem Tov's lifetime, but then the Baal Shem Tov passes away in 1760, and then as his students take over and it starts really expanding into like central and western Ukraine, into Belarus, and then once it hits Lithuania, it starts pushing up against this wall of opposition to the extent that the quote unquote mainstream Jewish establishment in Eastern Europe puts them in cherem. There's
Yeah.
this like very intense moment where the Hasidic people are put in cherem. And it lasts like this for another 50 years or so. And then what's so interesting is that what happens is that the Hasidic community is spreading west, and the Enlightenment is spreading east from the west, like from Germany and Austria, and starts hitting kind of Hungary and Poland around basically the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the same time. And what happens, this is the moment, because a lot of people are like, what happened? Like, you read the early Hasidic texts. There's a text, for example, that is very prominently is going to be featured in my next book that's coming out in a few weeks. Um, this text from a grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, who writes, and I'm translating word for word, and he says, in every generation, God enlightens the eyes of the Talmidei Chachamim, the smart people, the smart people of that generation, to interpret the Torah according to the needs of that generation. Think of this statement for a second. This is saying that rabbis in every generation have the right, not just the right, they're being enlightened by God to interpret. If you say this today in a Hasidic community, you're gonna get, well, people are gonna laugh at you probably most of the time, but depending how much power you have, and it's so much of it is seen as like the core of what like progressive Judaism is, there's a Judaism for every generation. So people are very often like, what happened to the Hasidic movement? And there's a lot of things, and there isn't just one thing that basically made, but a big part of it is that they still saw themselves as very traditional, and in many ways they were very traditional. And when they started kind of brushing up against the Enlightenment, and then it wasn't called reform, mostly what was called the Neologan in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but the early forms of reform and what we now call reform or conservative or whatever other name we give that, and that's when they started joining forces. That's when you suddenly start seeing the opposition against the Hasidic movement dies down. And both what we come to know today as Haredi, as ultra Orthodox communities, join forces against the quote unquote real threat, the Enlightenment. So that is when it starts. So what I want to say is for anyone who knows the Hasidic community today, which is what was gonna get to where I was raised, and they seem to be the polar opposite. They didn't become what they are today until after the Holocaust.
Yeah.
That part is not is it's when I want to say I know it's a harsh statement to say something that isn't debatable, but I'm saying that quite literally that isn't debatable, and what I mean that in a very simple way. And I invite anyone, go look up photos of Hasidic rabbis before the war. You can see something very interesting. Look up if you compare photos of Hasidic rabbis before the war and Hasidic rabbis today. The rabbis are dressed the same kinds of clothing. They're not nothing much has changed. But when you look on the people around them, that's where you start seeing the difference. You look at Hasidic rabbis today when they're surrounded by their students and everyone looks the same, everyone dresses in the same clothes, everyone has their long beard and payas, and everyone does. You look on Hasidic rabbis surrounded by their own people before the Holocaust, and some people are wearing nice short suits and ties, and some people wear different kinds of hats, some people don't wear hats. There's a lot more diversity just on first, even on the first look. So the kind of the conformity that I was born into and that I grew up into, and I will say, I guess in my family, given that my grandparents were both Hasidic rabbis and have been like that for long generations, maybe not a lot has changed. But the community as a whole was actually never as segregated and sheltered from the outside world. Both the wider Jewish community, the Hasidic community used to be a lot more intertwined with the rest of the Jewish world and even with the non-Jewish world. And I will use one other example, and then I will move on to talk from this. Just how the mindset shifted. So I grew up in Williamsburg. Williamsburg is in the Hasidic community, and the largest chunk of Hasidic Jews were Holocaust survivors. I mean, almost everyone was a Holocaust survivor, but the largest group were Hungarian Holocaust survivors. That has to do a lot with the fact that because the Holocaust in Hungary lasted only 10 months, so relatively more people in Hungary survived compared to Poland and a lot in Ukraine. Um, but so like I grew up, I mean, by chance, like the synagogue that I would go to, which was run by my grandfather, was one of the only like Polish synagogues in Williamsburg. But just generally, something that I grew up with was people my grandparents' generation all spoke Hungarian. And they spoke Yiddish as their first language, but they all knew Hungarian well, and they spoke Hungarian all the time to each other, and that was fine and cool, and no one blinked an eye. And those same people would like speak to each other in Hungarian and then go and get upset if their grandkids dared to speak in English.
Sure.
It was this shift. Some of it has to do a bit with something that existed already before the war, which was that America, the U.S. is uniquely dangerous. Like the cultural, these ideas of quote unquote freedom that supposedly exist in the U.S. are uniquely dangerous to a Jewish lifestyle. But a lot of it is also is that the community became a lot more sheltered and a lot more segregated after the Holocaust. And we can that on its own can be a long conversation. But I want to just to get back to answer your question a bit to like the Hasidic to how is it. So I get born into the Hasidic community after the Holocaust. So
And
there's
just to be
there's
clear, Williamsburg and Borough Park are neighborhoods in Brooklyn, in
yeah.
case
So
anyone
Williamsburg.
doesn't know that. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I grew up in Williamsburg, which is a neighborhood in Brooklyn. Williamsburg is actually a unique place in the Hasidic, in the context of the Hasidic and in the Jewish world. So Williamsburg, the religious community in Williamsburg is by now 100% Hasidic. What I mean by that is every single guy who gets married in Williamsburg wears a shtreimel, to use like a very specific example. At the same time, it doesn't belong to any specific Hasidic sect. So there are these villages, like there's several of them in upstate New York and Rockland and Orange County. There are those villages that are created by specific sects. So those usually tend to be only that specific sect. Williamsburg doesn't belong to a specific sect. It is the largest sect is Satmar, though that there I would say like it used to be 80%. It's probably now only 70% and so on. But they are the largest sect. But there are a lot of other sects. I grew up mostly in Fishnitz, which is another sect that has a few thousand people in Williamsburg, and there's a few other ones, but it's fully Hasidic. Every other place also has like Borough Park has non-Hasidic people, even
Mhm.
even Haredi people. Even in Israel, same story. Like there isn't a single neighborhood or city that is just purely Hasidic people. So Williamsburg is its own. It's known around the world as this cultural phenomenon. Um, so I get yeah. So I'm born in the early '90s, Hasidic Williamsburg. Both of my parents come from Hasidic dynasty, so that's something that has been around almost since the third generation of Hasidic leaders. Because in the beginning, like when the Baal Shem Tov passed away, the person who replaced him was a student, and then it kept being students for like like 3 to 4 generations. But then it started like what happens with a lot of movements when they start to get a lot of power, it started to coalesce around dynastic families. So by now, 99% of Hasidic rabbis, of Hasidic leaders, not rabbis, and will explain in a second the difference between a rebbe and a rabbi, but the vast majority of Hasidic rabbis and literally all of the Hasidic rabbis of the big sects um, are rabbis because their father and the grandfather and the great grandfather and so on have been rabbis. That is true for the Satmar Rebbe. That was true even like I know Chabad, where like people think, oh, he was such a unique figure. It's true even for him. It's true for Belt. It's true for it's true for every Hasidic sect. They're all there because their father and grandfather and great grandfather and so on. And those families tend to marry each other. So both of my parents come from different dynasties, but related to many of those dynasties. Um, so like like my parents, my dad's parents lived in Borough Park, my mom's parents lived in Williamsburg, as I said. And my four grandparents, this is the part that I think is a very New York story, and I use that a lot in political context, which is my four grandparents were all born in four different countries in Europe and in the Middle East. And they all ended up in Brooklyn, which is very much what New York is, and I think we're very proud of that. This like collection of immigrants. Now, in terms of family, I have a small family of 12 siblings, which is it's I would say in the outside world that would be the equivalent of 3 kids, not even four. It's not even that big. Like I know I have in my immediate and extended family, I know people with 20 kids, one woman who gave birth to 20 kids. So big families are common. By now, all 12 of my siblings are married. They all have kids, a lot of kids. My dad just turned 60 and already has great grandkids, which is all very common. And you attend, so the schools that I attended to are gender segregated, literally from nursery, which is kind of also unique. In a lot of Hasidic communities around the world, it tends to segregate only starting in in first grade, sorry. But for us, it was segregated from the beginning by gender. Um, girls' schools tend to offer a relatively better education, a bit more equivalent to what you would get at a public school in terms of the content of what you're taught. for a very weirdly sexist reason. Like girls get a better general education, but not for feminism or anything, but more because the community was like, someone is gonna have to read the bills and the doctor and go to the doctor, and men are supposed to just study Torah all day and not waste any time. Women, who cares? Sure. Let the women know the math and the English and then let them do the bank accounts and so on. Not saying there are no man who can do that, but that is basically the logic behind that. Um, so I grew up speaking Yiddish, learned Hebrew from a really young age, mostly what we would call Lushan Kodesh, which is basically just Hasidic, rabbinic, medieval Hebrew, which is quite different from modern Hebrew. I did pick up modern Hebrew. My dad is from Jerusalem, and I was around it quite a bit. And then I even studied Aramaic starting in fourth grade. And I would say I also studied some ABCs, but I knew Aramaic better than I knew English growing up, and then studied English only after I left. I got married in an arranged marriage at the age of, like, got engaged at 17 and married at 18, which is again very common in the Hasidic community. Like, none of that, I have 12 siblings. None of all of us were teen parents for context.
Mhm.
Like, I know I think a lot of American pop culture has an obsession with teen pregnancy, and I'm like,
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
all of us.
That was normal, sure.
It's no. And then I started leaving when I was 20. So a bit soon after my son was born. And that was where the real kind of like journey and struggle and began. But the other thing that I will add is obviously the gender segment, which for me was always present. I don't necessarily remember a day that I have this people have discussion like, when did you realize that you identify as a girl? You know, I don't. My memories begin with crying that my dad wants to make me payas is meant for boys, and telling my mom at age 4 when she caught me. I'm not gonna get graphic on here. People can find it in my book. She caught me doing something to myself, and I said, "I think I'm a girl." Like, those are some of my earliest memories. Um, so that has been with me since I was really young. I had no words for it, and it's a big part why I think LGBTQ and trans specific awareness is so important, because so much of my struggle was not even having the words to describe it and to know it. And for most of my preteen and teenage years, I was convinced that I'm crazy.
And in some ways, that's by
Um,
design, right? Like within the community, part of
yes,
keeping kids only literate in a certain way is a way of creating that much more control.
100%. It is a way, to quote my dad. So, my dad runs a school for teens at risk. By teens at risk, we're not talking about people who are on drugs. Maybe some of them are smoking weed. We're not talking like at risk of whatever, but at risk, I mean, they might be talking to some girls, they might have smartphones, whatever. At least that's what it was 15 years ago. I don't know if that has changed since. One of the things that he told me, so after I got married, my first kind of job was also tutoring some other teens at risk, so to speak, at a school. And one of the things that he told me, which as a matter of pride, as a good thing, which still sits with me sometimes on how messed up it is that he told me that you just gotta try to keep them in there until we can get them married at like 17, 18. And then they're just there. They're stuck. They have nowhere. It's not like they can leave anyway. They're stuck here and we'll be fine. Like, it's an intentional of like, how do we get people to keep? They have no way of surviving on the outside. And I mean, and that is changing. Like, it's like for me, like when I was 20, and I'm like, okay, I need some more answers on a lot of, sorry, I was like, I need answers on some subjects. There was nothing like I got on the internet. Someone who thinks it's a new world. It's a new world. But I will say one final about it, and then I will hear where we want to go with this. But one of the to give like the context, like um how much the internet changed. So when I was leaving, I was married, and I was very open with my ex-wife. Like, we had a, I don't know what you can call it. It was an arranged marriage, so I don't know what you want to call it. But we got along well. And at some point, her family learned that I wasn't religious, and they wanted my ex to leave me, and she refused. So they dragged her to our Rebbe, to our whatever, who was supposed to be, who was also very close, like family and everything. Great. And they talked to him and told him all the bad things that I'm doing, and they mentioned in passing that I was spending some time at a library. And so he grew up in Romania in like the 1930s, where libraries were the peak evil. It's like where all the like young enlightened, whether it was the socialists or the communists or the Zionists, there were all these different Jewish youth groups, and everything would happen at the libraries. And he got all like, oh no, like I need to promise not to go to the library, and I can't go to the library. And the library became this evil. And it was so ironic to me because I'm like, I promise you, I can, on this tiny device, I can find way worse things than I can ever find in a library relative to them. But yeah.
Yeah, and I mean it's so funny because like obviously I grew up, a Reformed Jew, fully integrated into regular society, like secular and Christian society. Like the most wholesome thing one could do is go spend time at the library after school, right? Like if you're going to the library, you're kind of a nerd. So like it's pretty amazing that
I was
that
definitely a nerd.
sure.
You can get that.
So one thing that
But
I
I mean,
think,
yeah, go ahead.
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, for us, it's really good if you spend time in the what we call the Oitzer Asvurim, which was the library at synagogue or the library at yeshiva. That was a good
Sure.
thing. That would
Yeah,
also
yeah,
be
yeah.
like a very similar vibe. You're basically a nerd if you just go and find all the unique books that no one else reads and do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is the comparison. That's true. Um, so one of the things that I have found, and this is really where you started just now, but most inspiring in the conversations we've had is the way in which you have really worked to reclaim the Judaism you grew up with to be a part of who you are today and what you do today. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how the kind of inherited theology that you grew up with has transformed with you. And before we move on, I want to tell everyone, obviously, Abby has an incredible story. This was just a little fragment of it. Um, Her book, Becoming Eve, has much more of it. If you want to know more, go buy the book.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, so here, the way I describe it sometimes, and it is a very simplistic version, but because so I had after I left, I had about a 2 to 3 year period where I didn't want to have anything to do with Judaism. I have a mentor who calls that post-God traumatic disorder. And I actually think some psychologists should do work on it. I wouldn't be surprised if that's a real thing, where it's like everything is so intertwined. The other thing you got to understand about the Hasidic communities, there was never any real difference between this is biblical, this is like from the Torah, this is from the Talmud, this is a custom, this is theology, this is philosophy, this is Hasidic, this is everything, and there's no difference between culture and religion, and which, to be honest, historically is I think how most of the world ran for a very long time. But everything is just one giant, to use a Hasidic term, it's just one giant cholent and kugel mixed into one. And you just like, you don't know, like, there's no separation between like eating gefilte fish on Shabbos is the same as wearing a shtreimel on Shabbos, and like everything is just, latkes on Hanukkah are almost just as important as lighting Hanukkah candles, which, okay, that's maybe true for a lot of people. But I mean to say, there really is no separation between culture and religion, between tradition and practice and dogma. Like everything is just intertwined. And I think as a result of that, I just hated everything. Like those were the people that traumatized me. Those were the people, and there was a lot of different stories. There was physical abuse. There is a lot of sexual abuse in the community. I'm to some extent maybe almost privileged that I didn't experience that directly, but I did have a lot of physical abuse from teachers and mentors and whatever, which took me leaving to realize that that was not okay. Um, and anyway, yeah, and there was a lot of other like just like trauma generally. So I just like I didn't want to have anything to do with it. Might have um,
Oh, you're breaking up quite a bit.
hello. Is it bad? Is
There
it
you are.
back?
Now you're back. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, the internet. Okay, the internet had a brain fart. I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. Pardon my language, but yeah.
No,
Okay.
that's fine.
Yeah.
That's totally fine. You can say whatever you want, literally. Um, the
Sorry, where did I get cut off?
so you got cut off saying that there was a lot of trauma, and
Yes.
then you're moving on to the next topic.
Yeah, so just like a lot of trauma, and as a result, I wanted to reject everything, and
Sure.
I did for about 2 to 3 years. And like to use an example, something that I shared at Kolot last year during Kol Nidre, which was that my first Yom Kippur after I left, I organized a camping trip for other people who grew up Hasidic and have left, and we went to this campsite somewhere in the Jersey wilderness, which is apparently a thing in central Jersey. On the way we passed, I don't remember if it was a ShopRite or a Walmart, one of those like big box office like stores. And we went to the meat section. I'm not kidding. And we literally were like, how many parts of a pig can we find? And we're gonna get this. But here's the story that I want to get to, which like for me was actually I think a defining moment of the way I looked and approached Judaism after. We were sitting that night, Kol Nidra night, around a campfire, grilling pork hot dogs, and I don't remember exactly what else. And it wasn't planned or anything. And we start singing Kol Nidre on a full like. Sorry, let me rephrase it. We start singing Kol Nidre like in the
Yeah.
full Hasidic like. To this day, I don't think I've ever had a more spiritual Kol Nidre. And what do I mean by that? I'm not saying that okay, if you want to feel a good Kol Nidre, you got to go do it in the forest of a pork hot dogs. I think for me, what I realized then was that there was a certain purity to it. There was a certain like, we're not doing this because anyone is forcing us to do. We're not doing it for any particular reason. But there's more to it because let's be honest, there's nothing more Jewish than eating pork on Yom Kippur. What do I mean by that? I mean by that is that someone who really doesn't care about eating pork on Yom Kippur.
Right.
Someone who is really like disconnected doesn't care. There's a lot of different Hasidic stories actually on this topic of someone like I don't know, like going and doing stuff intentionally on Shabbos or stuff like that. And there's a story I don't know, it's said on a lot of different Hasidic rabbis, but I think it's true no matter who said it, which was that they're not concerned about the people who intentionally want to go and break Shabbos. They're concerned about the people who don't even know it's Shabbos.
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
if you are in Yiddish, there's a word for it, which is alahachisnik or dafkanyak. Like you intentionally want to do something. There's something deeply Jewish about that. And I think that I didn't realize it at the time, and then later, as I started, or the way I would describe it is like if you imagine a circle of Jewish observance, and like Hasidic, I don't know, ultra Orthodox Judaism was at point one, and then I made a 180-degree turn in trauma. I destroyed the entire circle, and then I picked up some pieces of it and went and created my own circle, and that is how I perceive it. And it's truly the way. So what I started realizing is that doing the things we're doing. To use an example, like we were sitting on Neila, like the Neila that we did this year, blocking the Brooklyn Bridge for Palestine and singing and chanting. That is, to some people, we are breaking maybe who knows how many rules. But when I think of it on a deeply, in a real traditional and spiritual level, this is in the tradition of what we have really been doing for thousands of years. Judaism was never static. Not just that it wasn't static, it was the pride of Judaism. And Judaism has always had a rebellious strand from the beginning. And when specific, I mean, I think that's true both in a traditional way, but it's even more so when you start studying, which I spend a lot of time, like the academic or kind of scientific history of how Judaism develops. And you start seeing how so much of it was just these basic ideas of we want to do better than what did before. And it comes with rebellion. Every stage of it comes with taking some parts of that exist before. It's how we end up with all of our holidays kind of just being agricultural holidays and redefining them in our own way. Or
Yeah.
like in Kabbalah, there's a concept in Aramaic, it's called milin litzadi la'a yemalel, which means speaking words against God. And there's this long history of arguing with God. You see it with Abraham, you see it with Moses, but you see it in a real way, where like people are just like, how dare you? Like I know like after the Holocaust there was a lot. I heard this directly from Hasidic Holocaust survivor. I think a lot of other people have said this when people ask him like how did you keep your faith during the Holocaust and after, like how did you stay religious? And he is like, oh, I just had to keep believing because I need to get up in the world to come, and I need to have we need to have a conversation. Like this idea of, and this is not talking about belief, like everyone has their beliefs and disbeliefs, but this idea of looking at something, appreciating some of the experience with it, disregarding some other parts of it, and fighting with some of it, intentionally reinventing so much of it, is a deeply Jewish tradition. And I will say, in some ways, when specifically when I think about the Jewish left, and I know, like internally, and I know you, like we have had these conversations with so many of our colleagues of like, we're thinking of how do we really take this moment in time and really turn this into like a deep and intentional and beautiful like diasporic Judaism. But in so many ways, we have already done it. Like this is like, I see our wrestling, which is one of the literal meanings of the word Israel, of the word for Jews. We are part of that tradition in such a beautiful way. And I don't want to talk down to anyone else, but if all you're doing is just doing what your parents and grandparents have been doing without any wrestling with it, without any change, without any disagreements, like cute, cool. But that's not what Judaism has historically been.
Sure. So you keep alluding to God
Mm,
and talking about having been so deeply in a society where every aspect of your day was kind of wrapped up in God, no matter whether it was what like us in the integrated world would think of as that's religion, that's culture, that's law,
yeah,
that's whatever, everything in the Hasidic community, that's it's all about God.
yeah.
How has that transformed for you, and what how do you kind of understand your relationship to God, be it he or her or they or it, now that you have
Mm,
wrestled yourself with so many different aspects of
yeah.
Judaism?
It's a good question. It's a very interesting question. I will say though, one thing just to say about the Hasidic community and how it works is that yes, they say and they claim that everything is about God, and there's like there's a verse in Tehillim, Shiviti Hashem lenagdi tamit, like I need,
Yeah.
and that becomes a really big deal in like most Hasidic synagogues in front of the person of the cantor, the person leading the services. There's signs of different versions that say that. In reality, if you go into synagogue and you quietly you have conversations with people and you say, I don't know if you believe in God, you're not going to get into a lot of trouble. If you walk into a colored church, you're going to get into more trouble. So I think we need to keep that in mind. Like we
Sure.
shouldn't like look at them and be like, oh, they're the perfect. But
No.
yes, there is
Yeah.
definitely this
I mean,
idea.
atheism has gone, it goes back to Acher and the Talmud, right?
Exactly.
Like, yeah,
Or from the beginning, everyone. Yeah,
yeah,
but
sure.
that's the interesting thing. That's what I was gonna get to. Because like
Yeah.
it's the scary word. God is like it's very interesting because there's so in Kabbalistic traditions it goes back to before that, but a lot of times when we refer to God's like written out name, the one like in English there's a word for it, I can't even pronounce it. The tetra whatever for just like the name
Tetragrammaton.
tetra,
Yes, the
which is I
tetragrammaton.
guess
Yeah,
meant to be like look like a scary word.
sure.
Um, yeah, whatever. But then so it's very often just called the Shem Ben Dalet Otiyot, which means the name of the four letters, the four-letter word.
Four-letter word. Yeah, I never
It is
thought about that. That's
literally called the
hysterical.
four-letter
Yeah,
word.
that's
I'm
so
gonna leave
funny.
it there. I'm gonna leave it there.
Sure.
But it is an intense word. It's an intense concept to a lot of people. At the same time, for those of you who haven't, I encourage you to read. There's a book called Jewish with Feeling by Rabbi Stein, who has had a really strong impact on me. I still got to meet him twice before he passed away in 2014, and both on a personal and his writings. But the first chapter of that book is literally called "Oi, what a word!" talking about God. What does God even mean? So here's something that's very interesting. if I take some, and there's different Hasidic schools of thought about God, but some Hasidic definitions of God, and you compare that to the academic definition of theism versus atheism, it will fit better into the academic definition of atheism.
Yeah.
Specifically, there's two main schools of thought about what God is, and there's one that is very well known, which is that everything in the world has a spark of God. People know that a lot because it's like what Chabad goes with, but there's actually a more common in the Hasidic community, more common idea, which is that everything is God.
Yeah.
Or rather, to redefine, God is a word that we use to define, to call the sum total of all there is. And I was very, for me, it was very much what I was told. One of my teachers, one of my mentors would describe it as like everything is God, similar to how like all the light that we see during the day is sunlight. And if you are in a synagogue with a stained glass window and you see suddenly a yellow and a blue light, it's the same light. It's just filtered through a different perception, and you see it in a different color. The sunlight hasn't changed. It's just the
Yeah.
perception of it. And that's the same idea.
It's
Now, when
funny.
you, yeah,
This the I when I was in rabbinical school, I took a class on Spinoza,
yeah.
and Spinoza was put in harem for that idea.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember asking the teacher, I was like, well, this is the like core concept of God and Hasidic thought. Like, is there any relation? And he's like, yeah, when I was studying, like, there are like little mentions in the diaries of some of the early rabbis of Spinoza, but like never actually
Never
like
public.
cited, never public. But it seemed pretty clear that like his thinking somehow made its way into early
The
Hasidic thought. Yeah.
Yeah, it very likely did. It very likely did. Um, I mean, I think also like the Kabbalistic ideas, but yes, definitely. So yeah, but if you look up the like, if you take this into the like purely academic definition of theism and atheism, this is atheism because
Mm.
this doesn't ultimately it doesn't believe there's no duality, there's no creator and created, there's no God and humanity, there's no God and people. It's just echad. It's just what they talk a lot about. Everything is just one, which it ultimately means if God is everything, it also means God is nothing. Because if there's nothing that you can point to. So, in many ways, I very often will identify as an atheist proudly and be like, because in some ways, like when it comes to the conversation of theism and atheism and the way people think about it, I don't believe in the God that most people think about when they think about it. At the same time, I relate to an idea that I think we have used the term God for that idea to grapple with it and to explain it. And I really like that idea. And that is specifically for me the easiest way to explain it, hands down, is this idea that we are all connected, and you can think of it in a very like scientific way, like if you start breaking down all the matter in the universe, everything is the same and everything has been created since the beginning. There's nothing new, like we all know, there's no new energy, whatever. I don't have to give a scientific class here, but in like that is some ways the way people relate to it. To me, it's more like when I think, for example, about like doing good or bad for other people are part of this. Other people are part of that God. If I do something bad for another person, I truly believe that I can do that. I would say that I'm harming God, and people have probably heard me say this at like protests or rallies, specifically around LGBTQ issues and trans kids. To me, it's not just it's not just hyperbole. It's not just putting out there. I truly relate to this concept, and I think the word God is a good term that we have used to describe it. That is the sum total of all there is. It is a way to relating to, some people will call it quantum physics, some people will call it a lot of other different names. And then I think historically, some people called it Allah, and some people in India had many different ways of calling it. So much of it is related, and so much of it comes from the human desire to explain something beyond the physical manifestation of what I'm going to touch right now.
Yeah.
There's a book, and I think I'm going to finish with that. I want to make sure we have some time, but there's a book called Religion for Atheists that I read years ago. Don't even remember who the author is. But what was so interesting, one of the main takeaways that I took away from that book is what it's trying to do is ask the question of specifically if you don't believe that religion the way we have it today came from divine revelation in the literal way, the way a lot of people believe in it, then the question then starts, then why is there religion?
Right.
And to start thinking about yes, yes, a lot of it. I think it was very often used by people empowered for as a medium of control, and we need to focus on that. We can't ignore that. But at the core of it, it was trying to answer some questions in our lives. And regardless of what you do or don't believe in, we still need those answers. We still need those space. And for me, this is the point at this point that caused our ancestors thousands of years ago to start probably the first thing that they were that people worship were the stars and the sun and the moon or whatever it was. Did I freeze again? Okay.
No, you're good.
Yeah,
You're good.
yeah. The
Yeah.
same thing that caused us to develop those beliefs, it's still here. The human condition is still here. And I have words like when I think of a prayer, okay, like I'm Hanukkah is coming and I'm standing up and I'm like, blessed, I say Baruch Atah, like I say, blessed are you, God, who has commanded us to light Hanukkah candles. What I'm thinking is that to me, the biggest message of Hanukkah is this like during the darkest time, we are shining a light in a very literal sense that is also supposed to be a spiritual message. And yes, I am grateful for again, instead of just giving a speech and start counting everything that is in the universe that I'm going to be grateful for, or everything that made up the world, we use God as a way to relate to that.
Right.
And yeah, and it's not new. None of this is I think I'm just like maybe I'm more comfortable than our spiritual forebears to say this out loud. But
Right.
these ideas are found not obviously Hasidic people take it a bit more, but in Kabbalistic ideas. And even before that, you start going back to like as far back as like Yecheskel, like Ezekiel, and he starts talking about seeing God sitting on thrones and whatever. And we're all like, what are you doing? He is just making sense of the world that he is seeing and probably some of his hallucinations. I'm not sure what he was
Sure.
high on. But and I'm saying this as a good thing, not as a
Yeah.
bad thing. That he was seeing. And this is our tradition. The Jewish God, that's the thing. And I think that's a big reason why a lot of Jews never converted on, never fell for any other religion that had a human manifestation of God because we were always just like we already have human gods. That's
Right.
me and you and everyone else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
if
I mean,
there's any yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I could go, and so like we could talk about that for another hour. Um, Uh, but one thing you did say, which I think is really I want to lift up, is this people are very, especially like on TikTok, on social media, when people get like a little bit woo-woo with stuff, people today feel very comfortable talking about the universe intends X or the universe does Y or the universe like has a purpose.
Yeah.
And like that, it's literally it's the same thing. Right. It's exactly what you're talking about. And it's a different word than God because God has all of those hangups that you were talking about before. But it is so, I agree. I think that I also think that's why there are so many people converting to Judaism right now, is
Yeah.
because the God concept within there is something that isn't so prescriptive. It's much more fluid and it can be closer to atheism than anything else. So thank
Yeah.
you. I want to get to
I mean, we also have
questions.
on a real way, I think Judaism has the largest number in percentage of people identify as Jewish and atheists compared to any other religion.
Yeah, no, I think that's
That's like
almost certainly true.
according to a Pew, no, according to a Pew poll I read once upon a time, but yeah.
Um, so I want to get to questions. Folks who
Yeah.
are in on Zoom with us, you are welcome. What I'm going to ask you to do, give me just a second. I have to remember how to change these settings. If you would like to ask a question, um, turn your video on first so I know that that's what you want to do, and then I'll ask you to unmute. Um, oh, Taylor is ready. All right, let's go, Taylor.
Les, thank you for taking the time to do this, by the way. Um, I just want to make more of a comment than a question. I really resonated with you, also Andy as well, talking about God, because that was my concept of God, and I've literally used God and universe the same way. Um, and I am on my Jewish journey, as you know, Andy. And that's how I've described it, and I've been able to understand it. I was agnostic in my 20s, so I think a lot of what you're saying tracks. So it's just nice to hear because I know I'm not the only one saying it, but in the silos I'm in, it pretty much is. So it's really refreshing. So I just wanted to comment and say that and say thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
I
you
love
so
that. Thank you
much.
so much. Thank you.
Yeah. I feel like especially in more like liberal or progressive spaces, we tend to not talk about God just because people are so uncomfortable with it. So, Taylor, thank you so much for saying that, because I think it's important that we do that when we can. Um, no one else is coming on video, which is fine. If one of you decide to, just do so, and I'll keep an eye out. I have another question, which is, you've got a book coming out.
Mhm.
Um, Tell us about how this book relates to your first book, Becoming Eve, what your goal in writing it has been, and who it's for.
Yeah, I mean, if let's see if I'm able to. I think I'm gonna share my screen so
You should be able to because you should be
both so people
co-host.
people yeah people can know where to buy it, but only if they want to, but also just to show because I think it describes a lot. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the book where it is at the moment. And like release date and everything. And apparently the last four digits of my credit card are visible, which is fine. Um, but so yeah, so this is called Sources of Pride. It is bilingual, so it has text in their original language, which is Hebrew or Aramaic. We're gonna change the subtitle. So what you see here, that's gonna change, hopefully. But other than that, this is the concept. Jews' views on gender, sexuality, and Talmud from biblical, Talmudic, Midrashic, rabbinic, Hasidic sources, and some contemporary and personal commentary. Ultimately, the entire I will allow myself why my screen is shared. This is like the manuscript. Um, I will show this is a bit, but specifically to your question of how does it relate, sorry, I want to show, give me a second. Okay, here. I want to show one specific part. When you're asking how it relate, by the way, we have a whole thing about God, obviously, but how it relates to kind of my life back. So there is like I literally have as an introduction an entire essay in the book about my relationship to Jewish text specifically. And obviously I don't people will get to read it and buy it.
Leave
Um,
root.
I think thank you. I think it's sorry. I think it is in many ways a direct outgrow of the first book, as much as it's going to be very different. The first one was a memoir. This is going to be Jewish text, about 80 texts, and then like lots of commentary and introduction. So there's a few parts to it, I would say. Um, First, it's not just, yes, it's about gender sexuality and everything, but there's a few other things that I've done very intentionally that I found very helpful. Is like for every text, there's also a very brief introduction. What is this text? When was it written? When was it written historically? When was it written traditionally for some of the texts? And also a bit what it is. And like, for example, I have like one comment that goes into explaining what the Mishnah is and what the Talmud is and what is the Babylonian Talmud and what is the Palestinian Talmud and so on. Like, what is Jewish law? How does Jewish law work? So I definitely see it as an opportunity. In some ways, it is an introduction to Jewish text in a book about gender and sexuality. Um,
Great.
the motto of the book is that someone who has never read a Jewish text before should still be able to read it and understand everything, and someone that has read every text in the book should still find it interesting. And I think I've managed with the help of the editor to get to that point in a good way. Um, so obviously it's a direct article. It's sources about gender. Some of the sources, specifically two of them, one which is from Shara Gilgulim, the Door to Reincarnation, one of the books from Dari from Rabbi Isaac Luria, the father of modern Kabbalah, is mentioned in my first book as the first text that I ever read that made me go, oh, maybe I'm not alone in this, and so on. And then the other part, there's like another text, which is actually on the cover, which is a text from a Hasidic rabbi of the 18th century, which is a text that I showed my dad when I came out to him. The point of all of these are that there's this possibility, this space for queer, trans, and non-binary and LGBTQ Jews within Judaism, but not just in a surface level.
Yeah.
Like there's a depth to it, there's a beauty to it, there's a realness to it that I think a lot of, unfortunately, like a lot of people, and I've heard that from so many queer people, have come to expect, where even if they are queer and very actively Jewish, they're still kind of like very often get this feeling of fine, we're fine with you, or this is fine, I just like gonna reject certain parts of Judaism and that's okay, as opposed to no, this is beautiful and powerful and we're gonna do it together. We're gonna hold
Yeah.
this. So yeah.
Great.
I think that
So
is basically the short answer to that. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm putting you on the spot. And I think that in April, when it comes out, we should maybe be talking about you teaching a multi-part class
Please.
for us, if you'd be open,
I will be
about
open.
yeah, about the text and about the book
Yes.
and
I think that would be
like
great.
yeah. Um,
I think that would be very nice. Yeah.
any other questions from the folks on Zoom before I ask a final question, unless one of you want the final question?
Okay. Oh,
Oh,
you
Evie?
muted.
There.
Here I go. I'm trying to formulate this into a question, and I don't know if I can, but I
That's
just
okay.
want to say that what you were talking about Judaism actually being closer to atheism, that like you blew my mind tonight. Like I've never heard that, and I so appreciated hearing it because it connected with how I've often thought or not thought, like, well, I don't believe in God, like, oh, it's okay. So I don't know how to make a question out of this, but I just kind of wanted to put it out there that I learned something completely new and unexpected from you tonight, and I just really appreciate that. I really have to think about this now.
Thank you. I will say a
Great.
story about that goes that someone I don't know, somewhere but once upon a time someone comes to a young rebellious teenager comes to a Hasidic Rebbe and says, Rebbe, I no longer believe in God. And the Rebbe is like, oh really? Tell me who's this God that you don't believe in? It's like, what do you mean the God who doesn't want me to light a fire on Shabbos, and the God who gets upset when I eat pork, and the God who hates when I do this, and the God who gets angry when I do that? And the Rebbe is like, oh, don't worry, I don't believe in that God either. Uh, so like this message of like I do think that in some communities, including in many Jewish communities, God is used as the boogeyman. I call that the boogeyman in the sky. So I tell people a lot when I don't have the space to go into detail, as little as we did today, but still some detail. And people ask me, "Do you believe in God?" And I'm like, "Which God do you mean?" And if they describe what I call the boogeyman in the sky, then I'm like, nope, then I'm very proudly an atheist. Like, if that's your God, then I don't want to hear about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And
thank you
this
for that.
is um, very much, very, very Reb Zalman. Yeah.
Yes. If that was definitely like, I think the way I think about it still to this day is very much influenced by himself. Yeah.
Yes. Me too. Me too. He is perhaps the greatest influence on my rabbinate as well.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your time tonight, Abby. I know like you've got a million different irons in the fire, and I'm really grateful that you're that we're one of them. Um, and I want to leave everyone that's listening, whether you're listening now or in the future, with a blessing from you, which is may we all find our kol nidre pork hot dogs to bring to this new Judaism that we're all building together. And I'm so glad that that you are in this with me, with all of us, and that we're sitting around that fire together. So thank you, Abby.
Thank you.
Thank you for being
And
with us, and we'll
yeah,
talk soon.
And happy Hanukkah to everyone, and taking that into Hanukkah and like, yes, whatever you relate to. All I want to say is that you're just as good a Jew. If Hanukkah for you is all about the donuts, that's totally okay. If it's all about the candles, that's okay. If it's about the music, whatever it's about, it belongs to all of us, just like it belongs to the Chabad guys who are going to stop you on the street asking if you're Jewish. It belongs to you just like it belongs to them.
Thank you. Thanks, Abby.
Thank you. Good
Have a
night.
great